The moment the screen lit up behind us, I knew something was wrong. Why was my husband holding another woman like that? And why did everyone else see it before I did? Why was his ex standing 10 feet away from me, smiling? And why did the timestamp on that photo say it was taken 3 weeks ago? Relax, Millie Caleb said under his breath, not even looking at me. You'll understand in a second. Understand what? My 5-year anniversary party had just turned into a public reveal I was never supposed to control. And as I stared at that image, his hand at Rachel's waist, her head tilted like she belonged there, I realized something worse. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. If you're watching from somewhere outside the US, tell me where you are. I always wonder how far these stories travel. And if it's late where you are, let me know your local time. I was about to find out exactly what my husband had been doing behind my back. A few weeks before that night, my life looked normal. Not perfect, but steady in the way you tell yourself is enough. Caleb and I had been married for 5 years. We lived in a high-rise condo just off the river in Chicago, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows that made everything feel bigger than it was. I had a stable career as a financial compliance analyst. My job was literally to catch irregularities before they became problems. And Caleb was building his startup, the kind that always sounded one investor meeting away from taking off. That was the version we showed people. The version I lived in had small gaps that didn't quite line up. It started with his schedule. Caleb used to be the kind of person who over-explained everything who he met, or what they talked about. Then gradually his answers got shorter. Just investor stuff. Late meeting. Don't wait up. At first I didn't question it. Startups are chaotic. I'd seen enough of his world to know that, but what I couldn't ignore was how his behavior changed around me. His phone was always face down now. Always. Even when we were alone. One night, I walked into the kitchen and saw his screen light up on the counter. It was a reflex. I wasn't trying to snoop, but my eyes caught the name before I could look away. Rachel. Just that. No last name, no context. The message preview disappeared before I could read it, and Caleb stepped in right behind me like he'd been tracking my movement. Who's Rachel? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He didn't hesitate. Consultant. Strategy. I told you we were bringing someone in. He said it like I had forgotten, like the gap was mine to fix. I nodded slowly. Right. I remember. But I didn't. Not really. Later that week, I saw her name again, this time in his email. He'd left his laptop open on the dining table, and I was just passing by when the subject line caught my eye. Re-revised terms, Rachel Pierce. Pierce. A last name now. A real person. I stood there longer than I should have, reading just enough to recognize the tone. It wasn't strictly professional. There were phrases that blurred the line, familiar, almost warm. Caleb walked in before I could scroll further. You going through my emails now? He asked, not angry, just sharp. I stepped back immediately. No, it was open. He closed the laptop with one hand. She's helping with positioning. That's it. That's it, I repeated. Yeah. He gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Millie, you of all people should understand how this works. That line stayed with me. You, of all people. Because he was right. I did understand how things worked, especially when money contracts and blurred boundaries got involved. That's what made the next part harder to ignore. A few days later, I was reviewing our joint credit card statement. It wasn't something I did obsessively, but I liked knowing where things stood. It was part of how I kept control quietly without making it a big deal. One charge stood out. A high-end restaurant downtown. Not the kind Caleb and I went to casually, the kind you booked weeks in advance for a specific reason. I checked the date. Tuesday night. The same night Caleb told me he'd be grabbing something quick with investors. I waited until he got home. You ate at Leora's on Tuesday? I asked, sliding the statement toward him. He glanced at it for less than a second. Yeah. Investor dinner. Which investor? Millie. He exhaled like I was making something simple complicated. Do you want names now? No. I said calmly. I just didn't recognize the place. He leaned back, arms crossing. It was last minute. Someone picked it. I didn't even choose the restaurant. That should have been enough. It almost was. But something didn't sit right. Leora's wasn't a last-minute place. You didn't just walk in and grab a table. And you definitely didn't end up there by accident. I didn't push further. Not then. Instead, I did what I always do when something feels off. I watched. I paid attention to patterns, to timing, to the way his explanations lined up or didn't. And once I started looking, the details kept stacking up. Another charge. Different night. Same part of the city. A calendar block labeled strategy session with no attendees listed. A text notification that lit up his screen one morning while he was in the shower. I didn't open it, but I saw the name. Rachel. Again. By the end of that week, I wasn't asking myself if something was wrong anymore. I was asking myself how much I was missing. Still, I didn't confront him. Not because I was afraid of the answer, but because I needed to understand the full picture before I said a single word. That was the difference between reacting and knowing. And then late Friday night, while I was sitting at the kitchen island going through another statement, something new appeared. A charge. Same restaurant, same amount range. But this time, the timestamp was different. It was still processing, meaning it had just happened. Right now, I looked up at the empty apartment. Caleb had told me he was working late at the office. I stared at that charge for a long moment, my chest tightening not with panic, but with something colder. Clarity, because this time I didn't need to guess. I knew exactly where he was. And for the first time, I decided I wasn't going to wait for the truth to come to me. I was going to go see it myself. I didn't rush. That was the first thing I noticed about myself as I grabbed my coat and keys. No panic, no shaking hands, just a quiet, focused kind of movement like my body already understood what my mind was still catching up to. The restaurant was 15 minutes away, long enough for doubt to creep in. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe the charge was delayed. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation I hadn't considered yet. But I kept driving. Chicago at night has a way of reflecting everything back at you, glass water headlights. It makes the city feel like it's watching. And as I pulled into the valet lane at Leora's, I had the strange feeling that I was stepping into something that had already been set in motion without me. I'm just meeting someone, I told the host when I walked in, keeping my voice steady. He nodded and gestured toward the dining room. The place was exactly what I expected. Low-lighting, soft conversations tables, spaced just far enough apart to feel private, but not hidden. I didn't need to scan the whole room. I saw him immediately. Caleb was sitting at a corner table, back partially turned toward the entrance. Across from him, Rachel. She looked exactly how I imagined she would. Polished. Confident. The kind of woman who didn't second-guess her place in a room. They weren't leaning over documents. There were no laptops, no folders, no signs of a strategy session. There was a glass of wine in her hand, and Caleb's hand was on the table, close enough to hers that it didn't need to touch to say everything. I stood there longer than I should have, long enough to notice the way he smiled at her, softer than the version I'd been getting at home. Long enough to see her reach across the table and briefly brush his fingers like it was natural. Like it had happened before. I didn't walk over. That would have been easy. Emotional? Immediate? Instead, I stepped back into the hallway and pulled out my phone. I angled it carefully through the opening between the wall and the dining room. One shot, then another. Clear enough to see their faces. Clear enough to show proximity. Clear enough that no one could call it coincidence. I lowered my phone slowly, my pulse finally catching up to me, but not in the way I expected. I wasn't shaking. I was thinking, because whatever this was, it wasn't new. People don't move like that on a first meeting. They don't look that comfortable crossing lines unless those lines have already been blurred somewhere else. I left before they saw me. The drive home felt shorter, quieter. By the time I walked back into the apartment, I had already made one decision. I wasn't going to confront him tonight. Not yet. Because if I did, all I'd get was a version of the truth shaped around whatever he thought I knew. And I didn't want a version. I wanted everything. Caleb came home a little after 11. "Hey," he said, casually dropping his keys on the counter like it was any other night. "You still up?" I was sitting at the kitchen island, laptop open. "Yeah," I said, not looking up. "Just finishing something." He walked past me, heading toward the bedroom. "Long day. I'm exhausted." I glanced at the time. 11:17 p.m. The same time the charge had posted. "Good meeting?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Yeah," he said, without hesitation. "Productive." I nodded, letting the silence sit for a second longer than usual. "Where'd you go again?" I asked. There was a pause this time, small but real. "Just a place downtown," he said. "Why?" "No reason," I replied, finally meeting his eyes. "I was just curious." He held my gaze for a moment, then shrugged it off and disappeared into the bedroom. That was the first crack. Not the dinner, not the photos, the pause. Because people who are telling the truth don't need to adjust their answers. I closed my laptop slowly after he was gone. Then I opened it again. Old habit. When something didn't add up, I followed the numbers. Caleb's startup wasn't something I was directly involved in anymore, but I had helped him set up the initial compliance structure. I knew where things lived, how the accounts were organized, what the naming conventions looked like. And more importantly, I still had access to a shared financial dashboard we'd never bothered to separate. I logged in. At first glance, everything looked normal. Operating expenses, payroll, vendor payments. Then I filtered. Consulting. The list that came up was short. Too short for the amount of activity I'd been seeing. 3 entries, all under one name. Rachel Pierce. The amounts weren't small. 5 figures each, spread across the last 2 months. I clicked into the details. Each payment was tied to a vague description: strategic advisory, market positioning, growth alignment. Words that sounded legitimate. Words that meant nothing without context. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This wasn't just dinner. This was money. Significant money. And it wasn't coming from nowhere. I dug deeper. Transaction routing. Source accounts. That's when I saw it. A transfer chain. From a joint account, ours, into the business account. Then out again. To Rachel. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to keep reading. Dates, amounts, notes. Everything lined up too cleanly, too intentionally, which meant one thing. This wasn't impulsive. It was structured. I moved to the document repository next. Shared folders, archived agreements. And there it was, a file I hadn't seen before. Strategic partnership, Rachel Pierce.b. I hovered over it for a moment, my cursor still, because I already knew before opening it that whatever was inside wasn't going to be something I could unsee. But I also knew I couldn't stop now. Not halfway. I clicked. The file didn't open right away. For a second, my screen just sat there spinning, loading, giving me enough time to consider closing it and pretending I hadn't seen anything. But I didn't move. When the document finally appeared, it wasn't dramatic. No bold headlines, no obvious red flags jumping off the page. Just a clean, structured agreement. Strategic partnership agreement. Rachel Pierce's name was right under Caleb's. I started from the top, reading slowly the way I do at work when something matters. Every clause, every definition, every number. At first it looked legitimate. Rachel was being brought in as a strategic advisor. Compensation tied to performance. A vesting schedule for equity. Standard language. Professional. Carefully written. Which is what made the next section hit harder. Equity allocation. I read it once. Then again. Rachel wasn't just advising, she was receiving a percentage of Caleb's company. Not symbolic, not minor, enough to matter, enough to shift control if things moved in the wrong direction. I sat back slightly, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. That alone would have been a conversation, a serious one, but not illegal, not yet. I kept reading. The next section outlined capital flow, how funds would support expansion, how consulting fees would be issued, how liquidity would be maintained during scaling. That's when the language changed. Subtle, technical, but familiar. Funding source personal capital contributions supported by jointly held assets. I stopped. Read that line again. Then a third time. Jointly held assets. That meant me. Our accounts. Our savings. I scrolled further, my pulse steady but heavier now. There was a reference to a supporting document and attached authorization confirming consent from both parties. My name appeared. Millie Mason. Right there. Clean. Typed. Official. And underneath it, a signature. My signature. Or at least, something that looked like it. I leaned closer to the screen. Same shape, same flow. But something about it felt off. Too smooth in some places. Too rigid in others. Like someone had copied the idea of my signature without understanding the way it actually moved. I didn't react right away. Didn't panic. Because this was the kind of detail you couldn't afford to react to emotionally. You had to be precise. I opened a separate window and pulled up a verified document I knew I had signed a lease agreement from 2 years ago. Side by side. Same name. Different rhythm. The spacing between letters wasn't consistent. The loop in the M was tighter than mine. The final stroke ended too cleanly. It was close, but it wasn't real. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair. Okay, I whispered to myself. That word wasn't comfort. It was confirmation, because now I knew exactly what I was looking at. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was fraud. I kept going. There was a final section, appendices, attachments listed at the bottom. One of them caught my attention immediately. Collateral support documentation, MM. I clicked it. Another file opened. This one wasn't an agreement. It was a declaration. It outlined how my personal financial position, my income, my savings, my credit was being used as a stability anchor for the company's expansion. It read like I had willingly agreed to back Caleb's business decisions, as if I had reviewed everything, approved everything, signed off on everything. My chest tightened, but not in panic. In focus. Because the more I read, the clearer the pattern became. Every piece of this had been designed to look legitimate, layered, documented, supported, which meant whoever built it understood exactly what they were doing. And that made one thing very clear. This wasn't a mistake. Caleb hadn't crossed a line. He had built an entire structure around the assumption that I would never check. A soft knock pulled me out of my thoughts. I closed the document immediately. Yeah, I called. Caleb opened the door just enough to lean against the frame. You're still working, he asked. Mm-hmm, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Just catching up on some reports. He studied me for a second. Not suspicious. Not yet. Just observing. You should get some rest, he said. You've been pushing yourself a lot lately. I almost laughed at that. Almost. I will, I said. Just a few more minutes. He nodded and stepped away. The door clicked softly behind him. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Until I heard the bedroom door close. Then I turned back to my screen. Because I wasn't done. Not even close. I opened the document properties. Metadata. Created date. Last modified. Author. All standard fields most people never look at. But I did. Created by Caleb Mason. Last modified by Caleb Mason. Timestamp 3 weeks ago. The same week he told me he was restructuring internal strategy. I scrolled further. Version history. There were multiple edits, but no record of me ever accessing the file. No login tied to my account. No digital signature trace. Nothing. Just my name. Placed into the document like I had always been part of it. Like I had agreed. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Colder. Because now I understood the full scope. Caleb hadn't just lied to me. He had used me. My stability. My career. My credibility. He had turned those things into leverage. Without asking. Without telling me. Without thinking I would ever notice. I closed the file slowly, then opened my contacts. There was one name I hadn't spoken to in a while. Andrew Keller, corporate attorney. Someone I trusted from a previous compliance case. I hovered over his number for a moment. It was late. Too late to call. But not too late to send a message. I typed carefully. Hi, Andrew. I need to ask you something confidential. Possible unauthorized use of my signature on financial documents. Can you review something for me tomorrow? I stared at the message, then hit send. The screen dimmed slightly as the message went through, and for the first time since this started, I felt something settle into place. Not relief, direction, because whatever Caleb thought he had built, he hadn't accounted for one thing. Me actually looking? My phone buzzed less than a minute later. Andrew, send it. First thing in the morning. Don't sign anything else. Don't confront him yet. I read that message twice, then locked my phone. Across the apartment, everything was quiet. Caleb asleep, the city outside still moving, and me, sitting there in the dark, fully awake, fully aware of what I had just uncovered. I wasn't guessing anymore. I had proof. And the moment I decided what to do with it, everything between us was going to change. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was overwhelmed, but because my mind wouldn't let go of the details. Every line in that contract replayed itself in fragments. The phrasing, the structure, the way my name had been inserted like a formality instead of a choice. By morning, I wasn't emotional anymore. I was methodical. I left the apartment before Caleb woke up. Early meeting, I texted him, keeping it simple. No questions, no suspicion, nothing that would signal a shift. That was important, because the moment he sensed something was off, everything I'd seen could disappear. Andrew Keller's office was in a quiet building downtown, glass walls, clean lines, the kind of place designed to make everything feel controlled and intentional. He didn't waste time. Walk me through it, he'd said as soon as I sat down. I handed him the printed documents I'd prepared that morning. The contract, the appendix, the transaction summaries. I had highlighted the sections that mattered, but not in a way that told a story. Just facts. He read in silence for a while. No reactions, no interruptions. Just a slow, careful review. Then he set the papers down and looked at me. Did you sign this, he asked. No. Did you authorize anyone to sign on your behalf? No. Did you give verbal consent, email, text, anything that could be interpreted as approval? No. He nodded once as if checking off something internally. Okay, he said. Then this is exactly what it looks like. I didn't need him to say the word. But he did anyway. Forgery. The room stayed quiet after that. Not dramatic. Just clear. He flipped the page back to the signature. It's good, he added. Close enough to pass at a glance, but not under scrutiny. I compared it, I said. It's off. Yeah. He tapped the paper lightly. And more importantly, there's no execution trail. No digital verification tied to your identity. That helps. I leaned forward slightly. What does that mean for me? It means, he said calmly, that you're not legally bound by this document. A small part of me exhaled. Not relief, just confirmation. And for him, I asked. Andrew paused for a moment before answering. That depends on how far you want to take it. I held his gaze. Walk me through the options. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. Best case for him, he said. You confront him privately. He unwinds everything, returns the funds. You separate your finances. No legal escalation. And worst case, Andrew didn't soften it. Fraud investigation, civil liability, potential criminal exposure depending on how the funds were used and whether there was intent to deceive third parties. I nodded slowly. That's not even the part he should be most worried about. Andrew added. What is? You. I raised an eyebrow slightly. You're the injured party here, he continued. Your assets were used without consent. Your name was leveraged to legitimize financial movement that gives you leverage legally and strategically. I let that sit for a second. Leverage. The word felt different now, not abstract. Real. So what do? I asked. Andrew didn't answer right away. Instead, he slid the documents back toward me. Right now, he said, you don't confront him. You don't alert him. You don't change your behavior in any noticeable way. Why? Because if he realizes you know he has time to adjust, to move money, to rewrite narratives, to position himself. That matched exactly what I had been thinking. What we need, Andrew continued, is documentation. Clean, traceable, time-stamped evidence of everything that's already happened. I can get that, I said. I know you can, he replied. That's why you're here. There was a brief pause. Then he added, one more thing. I looked up. Don't sign anything he puts in front of you, Andrew said. No matter how routine it looks. I won't. And don't let him isolate you into a conversation where he controls the narrative. I almost smiled at that. That might be a little late, I said quietly. Andrew studied me for a second, then nodded. Then you control the setting when the time comes. I gathered the papers, organizing them back into the folder I'd brought. Okay, I said. So I wait. You prepare, he corrected. That word landed differently, because waiting sounded passive. Preparing didn't. I left his office with a plan forming, not fully defined yet, but structured enough to follow. Step 1, secure everything. Step 2, document every transaction. Step 3, understand exactly how far Caleb had gone. And then I got back to the apartment around noon. Caleb was already up, sitting at the kitchen counter with his laptop open. Hey, he said, glancing up. How was your meeting? Fine, I replied, setting my bag down. Just routine stuff. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me a second longer than usual. Everything okay, he asked. There it was. The subtle check. I met his gaze steady and calm. Yeah, I said. Why wouldn't it be? He hesitated for half a second, then smiled. No reason. That smile told me something important. He wasn't sure. Not yet. But he was watching. Actually, he added, closing his laptop slightly, I wanted to talk to you about something. I felt it before he said it. The shift. The setup. I've been thinking. Caleb continued, we should do something big for our anniversary this year. I leaned casually against the counter. Big how? Like, really big, he said. A party. Invite everyone, friends, business contacts. Make it a moment. A moment. I nodded slowly, like I was considering it for the first time. That's a lot, I said. What's the occasion? He smiled again, but this one felt more deliberate. Fresh start, he said. For everything. There it was. Not just a party. A narrative. A stage. I tilted my head slightly. You sure that's what you want? Yeah, he said, without hesitation. I think it's exactly what we need. I held his gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then I smiled. Okay, I said. Let's do it. Because in that moment, something became very clear. Caleb thought he was planning a reveal. A controlled environment where he could present whatever version of the truth he wanted, and everyone would accept it because of how it looked. What he didn't know was that I had already seen everything, and if he wanted a stage, I was going to use it. The next 2 weeks moved like a performance I didn't remember auditioning for. Everything looked normal from the outside. I went to work. I answered emails. I sat across from Caleb at dinner and asked about his day like I always had. And every time he answered, I listened a little more carefully than before. Not to what he said, but to what he avoided. The anniversary party became his main focus almost immediately. I'll handle most of it, he told me one night, scrolling through venue options on his laptop. You've got enough on your plate. That would have sounded considerate a month ago. Now it sounded strategic. Sure, I said lightly. Just tell me what you need from me. Honestly, just show up, he replied with a small smile. Just show up. I nodded like that didn't mean anything. But it did. Because if all I had to do was show up, then everything that mattered would already be in place before I got there. Which meant I needed to understand exactly what he was putting in motion. I didn't push for details. Instead, I asked the kinds of questions that felt casual. Where are you thinking? Who are you inviting? What's the theme? He answered most of them easily. Ballroom, downtown hotel, around 100 guests. A mix of friends, investors, and a few people from his company. Rachel's name didn't come up. Not once. But that didn't mean she wasn't part of it. It just meant he wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. While he planned the event, I focused on something else. Documentation. Every night after he went to sleep, I opened the same dashboards, the same folders, the same accounts. I wasn't looking for one big piece anymore. I was building a pattern. Transaction logs, transfer timestamps, authorization records. I exported everything into a secure folder Andrew had set up for me, time-stamped, organized, clean. The kind of file set that didn't just suggest something was wrong. It proved it. A few days in, Darren called me late. I pulled the system logs you asked for, he said. Anything useful, I asked. There was a pause on the line. Yeah, he said finally. More than useful. I leaned back in my chair, already bracing for it. Walk me through it. Every document you flagged, Darren continued, was uploaded from Caleb's admin account. Same device signature, same IP range. Meaning no one else did this, he said. It's clean. Direct. I closed my eyes briefly, letting that settle. Not surprising, but definitive. There's more, Darren added. I opened my eyes again. Go on. He didn't just upload the files, Darren said. He modified them. Multiple times. There's a version history trail. How many versions? 4 on the main agreement. 2 on the collateral doc. I sat up slightly. Can you see what changed between versions? Yeah, he said. Mostly formatting at first. Then, content adjustments. What kind of adjustments? Another pause. Your name wasn't in the first version, Darren said. That landed harder than I expected. He kept talking. It shows up in version 3. That's when the collateral language gets added too. I didn't say anything for a second, because that detail changed something. This hadn't just been a bad decision. It had evolved. He had built it step by step. Can you export that, I asked. Already, did, Darren replied. Sending it now. My laptop pinged seconds later. I opened the file immediately. There it was. Version history laid out in clean chronological order. The moment my name appeared. The moment the language shifted. The moment the document became something I had never agreed to. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic, not even anger. Precision. Because now I wasn't just holding evidence. I was holding intent. Darren, I said quietly, thank you. Millie. He hesitated. You okay? I will be, I said. I just need to finish this. After we hung up, I sat there for a long moment, staring at the screen. Then I opened a new folder. Event. If Caleb wanted to use that night to control the narrative, then I needed to understand exactly how. I started with the venue. A quick call to the hotel the next morning gave me more than I expected. I'm calling about the Mason anniversary event, I said, keeping my tone professional. Of course, the coordinator replied warmly. Mr. Mason has been very involved in planning. I just wanted to confirm a few details, I said. Specifically, the media setup. Absolutely, she said. We'll have a large projection system in the ballroom. There's a preloaded media sequence scheduled to run during the main toast. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. Preloaded, I asked. Yes, she said. Mr. Mason provided a file. It's already queued in our system. Can that be updated, I asked. Technically, yes, she said. But we usually require direct approval from the host. I understand, I said. And who has access to that system? Our AV team, she replied. And anyone with the admin credentials provided by the client. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat there letting the pieces connect. Preloaded media, scheduled timing, controlled access. Caleb wasn't improvising anything. He had planned the exact moment that screen would turn on, the exact moment something would be revealed, and the exact version of the story everyone would see. I opened the email Darren had sent again. Version history, metadata, proof. Then I opened a blank document. If he had a video ready. I needed one too. Not emotional, not reactive. Structured, clear, undeniable. I began outlining what it would include. The transaction trail, the forged signature, the version edits, the images from the restaurant, each piece placed in an order that told the truth without needing explanation. No accusations, just facts. Because facts don't need to argue. They stand on their own. That afternoon, Caleb came home earlier than usual. Hey, he said, dropping his bag by the door. Quick question. I looked up from my laptop, calm. Yeah, for the slideshow, he said casually, I'm putting something together. Just memories, moments, that kind of thing. I nodded. Sounds nice. Yeah, he said. Watching me, I figured I'd handle it. Keep it simple. Okay, I replied. He hesitated again. Unless you wanted to add something. There it was. The offer. The illusion of inclusion. I smiled slightly. No, I said. I trust you. Something in his expression shifted just a fraction. Satisfaction. Good, he said. I think it'll mean a lot. I'm sure it will, I replied. And as he walked away, I turned back to my screen, because now I knew exactly what he thought was going to happen that night. What he didn't know was that his version of the story had already been replaced. By the morning of the party, everything was already in place. Caleb moved through the apartment like someone preparing for a presentation he had rehearsed too many times. Calm, focused, almost excited. Car's coming at 6, he said, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. We should leave by 5:45. Okay, I replied, watching him from the doorway. He glanced at me briefly. You good? Yeah, I said. Just making sure I didn't forget anything. That wasn't a lie. I had gone over everything 3 times already. Not my dress, not my makeup, the files, the sequence, the timing. Every detail had to be exact. Because if I got one thing wrong, it wouldn't just be embarrassing. It would give him room to recover. And I wasn't giving him that. The ballroom looked even more polished than I expected when we arrived. Soft gold lighting, white table linens, a long bar set against the far wall. Everything about it said celebration. Renewal. Exactly the image Caleb wanted. Guests started arriving quickly. Friends, colleagues, people from his company. A few of them hugged me, smiling, telling me how beautiful everything looked. You must be so proud, one of his investors said. I smiled back politely. It's been a long few weeks. That was the closest I got to the truth. I noticed the screen almost immediately, mounted high at the front of the room, large enough that no one could ignore it. Currently blank waiting for its moment. Caleb stayed close to the center of the room, greeting people, shaking hands, playing the part perfectly. Every now and then his eyes flicked toward the AV booth in the back. Checking, confirming, everything on track. I excused myself about 20 minutes before the main toast. Just need a minute, I told him. Don't disappear, he said lightly. You'll miss the best part. I met his eyes. I won't, I said. That wasn't a promise. It was a statement. The hallway outside the ballroom was quiet. Carpeted, muted. Like the world had lowered its volume just enough for me to think clearly. The AV room was exactly where the coordinator had said it would be. A technician sat inside, headphones around his neck, watching levels on a monitor. Hi, I said, stepping in. I'm Millie Mason. He looked up immediately. Oh, hi. Yeah, we're all set for your event. Mr. Mason already uploaded the media. I know, I said, keeping my tone easy. I just need to double-check something. He hesitated. We usually don't make changes this close to. It's already approved, I said, gently sliding my phone across the table. He texted me earlier. The message on the screen was real, just not complete. Caleb had texted me that morning. Let me know if you want to add anything to the slideshow. He didn't specify what. He didn't need to. The technician read it, then looked back at me. Okay, he said it. What do you need? Just swap the file, I replied. He turned back to the system, pulling up the scheduled media. There it was. Anniversary, reveal.mp4. The name alone told me everything. Can you preview it? I asked. He clicked. The video opened on the monitor. Soft music. Polished transitions. Photos of Caleb and me from years ago. Vacations, birthdays, milestones. Then the tone shifted. The images became newer. Caleb smiling, relaxed. But not with me. Rachel appeared gradually. First in group settings, then closer, then alone with him. The framing told a story without saying it directly. A narrative of reconnection. Of something meant to be. I watched just long enough to confirm what I already knew. Then I looked at the technician. Replace it, I said. He plugged in the drive I handed him. What's the file name, he asked. Final presentation, I replied. He clicked through the folders, then paused. This one, he asked, highlighting it. That's the one. Do you want to preview? No, I said calmly. Just make sure it's queued in the same slot. He nodded, dragging the file into place. Done, he said. It'll run automatically during the toast. I watched the progress bar complete. One file gone, another in its place. Thank you, I said. No problem, he replied. Everything should run smoothly. I almost smiled at that. Smoothly. That depended on perspective. I stepped back into the hallway, the quiet wrapping around me again. For a moment, I just stood there, not because I was nervous, but because I was aware of what I had just done. This wasn't a confrontation in private. This wasn't a conversation where things could be softened or reshaped. This was exposure. Structured, documented, irreversible. And I had chosen the exact moment it would happen. When I walked back into the ballroom, the energy had shifted slightly. More people had arrived. The room felt fuller. Louder. Caleb spotted me almost immediately. Hey, he said, walking over. Where'd you go? Just needed some air, I replied. He studied my face for a second. You okay? I'm fine, I said. He smiled. Better than fine, he said. This is going to be a good night. I held his gaze just long enough to let that settle. I know, I said quietly, because it would be, just not in the way he thought. A few minutes later, the lights dimmed slightly. The signal. Caleb moved toward the front of the room, taking the microphone from the event host. Thank you all for being here tonight. He began, his voice smooth, practiced. The room quieted, all eyes on him, exactly where he wanted them. He glanced back at the screen, just once, then returned his focus to the audience. I wanted tonight to be about more than just celebrating the past, he said. I wanted it to be about what comes next. I felt the shift ripple through the room. Subtle, curious, anticipating. Caleb took a breath, then nodded slightly toward the AV booth. Right on cue. The screen behind him flickered to life. The first slide didn't raise any alarms. A simple image, our wedding day. Me and white Caleb smiling like he meant every word he had said back then. The room softened around it. A few guests let out quiet ahs, the kind you expect at events like this. Caleb relaxed visibly. Of course he did. This was the beginning he had designed. The next few slides followed the same pattern. Milestones, trips, birthdays, carefully curated moments that made everything look intact, whole. I stood still, hands loosely folded in front of me, watching not just the screen, but Caleb. He wasn't looking at me. He was watching the audience, measuring their reactions. That's when the shift began. It was subtle at first. A slide appeared that didn't quite match the tone. A screenshot, not a photo. A financial transaction log. Date, amount, routing. The kind of image that doesn't belong in a love story. A few people in the crowd leaned forward slightly, trying to understand what they were seeing. Caleb didn't react immediately. His expression held for a second too long, like his mind hadn't caught up yet. Then he turned, just a fraction, enough to see the screen behind him. The next slide came up before he could say anything. Another transaction. Larger amount. Same recipient name. Rachel Pierce. This time the room changed. The whispers started not loud, but present. Confused, curious. The emotional tone had shifted from warmth to uncertainty in seconds. Caleb stepped back slightly from the microphone. He started, then stopped. The system didn't pause for him. The next image appeared. A cropped photo, dim lighting, a restaurant table. Him, Rachel. Close enough that no explanation would make it professional. Someone in the audience gasped. Not dramatically, just enough to break whatever illusion was left. I didn't move. I didn't look at him. I watched the screen, because the sequence mattered. Every piece had been placed intentionally. The next slide stripped away any remaining doubt. The contract. Highlighted sections. Strategic Partnership Agreement. Rachel Pierce. Then, zoomed text. Funding source jointly held assets. Another transition. My name, Millie Mason. Clear. Centered. Followed by the signature. That false, almost perfect copy of something I never gave. Caleb moved toward the screen instinctively, like proximity could fix it. That's not, he started, his voice tighter now. But the system kept going. Version history appeared next. Clean timestamps. Edit logs. A highlighted line. Name added Millie Mason. Version 3. A murmur spread across the room. No confusion now. Understanding. The kind that doesn't need explanation. Caleb turned toward the AV booth, his jaw tightening. "Stop it," he said louder this time. "Turn it off." But it didn't stop, because the final piece hadn't played yet. The last slide came up slowly. Not a document, not a screenshot. An email. Internal. Short, direct. "As long as the signature is in place, we're covered." No ambiguity, no room to reframe. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. The kind of silence where everyone knows exactly what they just saw and what it means. Caleb stood there, his microphone still in his hand, but no longer in control of anything. His eyes scanned the room, searching for support, for an angle, for something to hold on to. He didn't find it. Rachel hadn't moved from her spot near the side of the room, but her expression had changed. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was staring at the screen, then at him, like she was recalculating everything she thought she understood. That was the moment Caleb finally looked at me. Really looked. Not as part of the scene, but as the person who had just rewritten it. There was no question in his eyes. He knew. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because the truth had already been said clearly, publicly, and in a way he couldn't take back. The room waited. Not for me. For him. And for the first time that night, Caleb had nothing prepared. For a few seconds, Caleb just stood there. Not frozen, just searching. You could see it happening in real time. His mind moving through options, trying to find a version of this that he could still control. He lifted the microphone again. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, his voice tighter than before, but still holding on to that practiced calm. "There's context here that—" "Then explain it." The voice didn't come from me. It came from somewhere behind the crowd. "Andrew!" He stepped forward slowly, not rushed, not aggressive, just present. Measured. The shift in the room was immediate. People recognized the tone even if they didn't know him. "Authority doesn't need introduction." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you are?" "Andrew Keller," he said evenly. "Counsel for Millie Mason." That landed. Not loudly, but completely. Caleb let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "Of course." He glanced around the room, trying to regain footing. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said. "These documents, yeah, they're real, but they're part of a business structure. Millie knows how this works." I could feel the eyes in the room shift toward me. I didn't step forward yet. I let him keep talking. "Startups don't survive without flexibility," Caleb continued. "We had to move fast. Bring in the right people. Rachel was part of that strategy." Rachel. At the sound of her name, she finally moved. 2 steps forward, then another. "Caleb," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. She was compensated. He went on. "That's what those transactions show." "It's not." "Did she sign it?" Andrew's voice cut through cleanly. Caleb stopped. What he asked. The authorization, Andrew clarified. The one using jointly held assets. "Did Millie Mason sign it?" Silence. "Not long, but long enough." Caleb's jaw tightened. "It was handled internally." "That's not an answer," Andrew said. "It was authorized." Caleb snapped. "We had a verbal agreement." "No, you didn't," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Because I wasn't interrupting, I was correcting. Caleb turned toward me slowly. "Millie, I never gave verbal consent." I continued stepping forward now. "I never approved the use of our joint assets, and I never signed anything." I could feel the room settle around that. "Final." Caleb shook his head like he was trying to push the moment back. "You're misunderstanding." "No," I said calmly. "I read everything. Every version." That was the first real crack. "Not in the situation." In him. Because now he knew exactly how much I knew. Andrew didn't move. He didn't need to. The evidence had already done the work. "But Rachel." Rachel stepped closer. "Caleb," she said again, this time firmer. "What is she talking about?" He looked at her then. "Finally. It's not what you think," he said, softer now. "This is just legal framing. It's how these deals get structured. Don't she cut in? That single word shifted something. Don't do that thing where you make it sound normal, Rachel said, her voice steady but sharp. I read the agreement. I assumed she was involved. She was, Caleb said quickly. No, I replied. I wasn't. Rachel's eyes moved between us. Then whose signature is that, she asked. Caleb didn't answer, and that silence said more than anything else could have. Rachel let out a small, disbelieving breath. You told me everything was clean, she said. You said your wife knew. I said she wouldn't have a problem with it, Caleb corrected. That's not the same thing, Rachel shot back. The tension in the room shifted again, not just toward Caleb now. Around him. He looked between us. Me, Rachel, Andrew, the edges closing in. This got out of hand, he said finally. That's all this is. It was never supposed to what I asked. Be seen. He didn't respond, because that was exactly it. Andrew stepped forward slightly. Mr. Mason, he said, his tone still controlled the documentation presented tonight, shows unauthorized use of joint assets, falsified authorization, and a pattern of financial transfers under that authority. Caleb let out a sharp breath. This isn't a courtroom. No, Andrew agreed. But the next place this goes will be. That landed harder than anything else, because now it wasn't about perception. It was about consequence. Rachel stepped back, physically, like she needed distance. I'm out, she said quietly. Caleb turned toward her. Rachel. No, she said, shaking her head. You don't get to pull me into this. Her voice wasn't emotional. It was clear. You said this was business, she continued. You said everything was handled. I didn't sign up for fraud. The word hung there, heavy, final. Caleb reached for something, anything. This can be fixed, he said, looking between us again. We can unwind it. Reverse the transfers. There's no need to escalate. There is, I said. He stopped, because that was the first time I had used that tone. Not emotional, not reactive. Certain. You used my name, I continued. My financial standing. My legal identity, without my knowledge. I held his gaze. That's not something we fix quietly. The room was completely silent now. No whispers, no movement, just the weight of what had been said. Caleb's shoulders dropped slightly, not in defeat, in realization, because for the first time that night, he understood the position he was actually in, not the one he had planned for, the real one. And there was no version of it where he was in control anymore. The party didn't end all at once. It unraveled, slowly, quietly, in the way people leave something they don't want to be part of anymore. No music, no announcements, just conversations cut short, chairs pushed back, and a room that emptied itself without needing direction. I didn't follow anyone out. I stayed. Not because I had anything left to say, but because I wasn't going to be the one who walked away from what had just happened. Caleb stood near the front of the room, no longer trying to explain, no longer holding the microphone. A few people passed him on their way out, offering nothing more than brief nods, polite, distant, final. Rachel had already gone. She didn't look back. Andrew stepped up beside me. You did exactly what you needed to do, he said quietly. I nodded once. I'm filing first thing in the morning, he added. Asset protection, fraud documentation, and a request to freeze any accounts tied to those transfers. Okay, I said. No hesitation, because there was nothing left to debate. Caleb finally walked toward me. Slower this time. Careful. Like he understood that whatever space existed between us now wasn't his to cross freely anymore. Millie, he said, stopping a few feet away. I didn't move. I didn't think it would go like this, he added. That almost made me smile. Not because it was fun, because it was honest in a way he hadn't been all night. I know, I said. He ran a hand through his hair, looking around the emptying room. I was trying to fix things, he said. The company needed leverage. Rachel had connections. I thought if I could stabilize everything first, then explain it to you by replacing me, I asked. He flinched slightly. It was exactly that, I said calmly. You just didn't think I'd see it. He didn't argue that, because he couldn't. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled. I can undo it, he said. The contracts, the transfers, all of it. I know you can, I replied. He looked at me, searching for something, permission, relief, a way back. But that doesn't undo what you did, I continued. That was the part he didn't have an answer for, because there isn't one. I didn't think you'd check, he admitted finally. There it was, not a defense, the truth. I held his gaze. That's the only honest thing you've said tonight. His shoulders dropped slightly. I messed up, he said. Yes, I replied. You did. Another silence. Shorter this time. Cleaner. I'll cooperate, he added. Whatever Andrew needs. I won't fight it. I nodded. That's your decision, I said, not ours. His. Because that's what had changed. We weren't a we anymore. He looked at me like he understood that. Like he finally saw the line that had been crossed and couldn't be uncrossed. I never meant to lose you, he said. I took a breath. Not because I needed time to answer, because I wanted to say it without emotion distorting it. You didn't lose me tonight, I said. You lost me when you decided I didn't need to know. That landed. He didn't respond. He didn't try to, because there wasn't anything left to fix in that sentence. Andrew stepped forward again, not interrupting, just marking the end of the conversation. We'll be in touch, he said to Caleb. Caleb nodded once, then stepped back. Not forced. Choosing to, and that mattered. Because for the first time since I had known him, he wasn't trying to control the outcome. He was accepting it. A few weeks later, everything looked different. Not dramatically, but fundamentally. The legal process moved quickly once the documentation was filed. Accounts connected to the transfers were frozen pending review. The company board stepped in and removed Caleb from operational control while the investigation was ongoing. It wasn't chaos. It was procedure. Quiet, structured, inevitable. I separated our finances completely. Closed joint accounts, reestablished everything under my name, clean lines, clear ownership, no ambiguity. There were moments when people asked if I was angry. I wasn't. Not in the way they expected. Anger is loud. This wasn't. This was resolved. Because I hadn't reacted. I had responded. And that made all the difference. The apartment felt different too. Not empty. Just mine. No tension. No second guessing. No watching for what didn't add up. Just space. Clear and quiet in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. One evening I stood by the window looking out over the city. The same view, same lights, same reflection in the glass. But I wasn't the same person standing there. Not the one who trusted without checking, not the one who filled in gaps with explanations that didn't hold. I didn't feel broken. I felt precise. Like I finally understood where my boundaries were and what it meant to enforce them. My phone buzzed softly on the counter. A message from Andrew. Court date confirmed. Everything moving forward as expected. I read it once, then set the phone down. No urgency, no anxiety, just confirmation. Because the outcome wasn't something I was waiting to see anymore. It was already in motion. And this time, I was the one in control of where my life went next. There's a difference between forgiveness and access, and I didn't understand that until I had to draw the line myself. For a long time, I thought loyalty meant staying trusting and giving people the benefit of the doubt, especially when it came to family, to marriage, to the life you build with someone. But what I learned is that trust without verification isn't kindness. It's vulnerability in the hands of the wrong person. Setting boundaries isn't revenge. It's clarity. I didn't expose Caleb to hurt him. I expose the truth to protect myself. And that distinction matters because it changes how you move forward. You don't carry bitterness, you carry awareness. If you've ever been told to keep the peace at your own expense or made to feel like asking questions is disloyal, I want you to reconsider that. You are allowed to understand what affects your life. You are allowed to protect what's yours. And forgiveness. That's something you give for your own peace, not as an invitation for someone to come back and do it again. If this story resonates with you, I'd love to hear your perspective. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done in this situation? And if you want more stories like this about boundaries, truth, and quiet strength, feel free to subscribe. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.